Hey, welcome to Real Estate Resource. Thanks for stopping by. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell. I really hope you enjoy this video. We're going to go ahead and get started. Anybody else that comes late, right, they can catch up. I'll have this up on YouTube later today. Usually every year in January and December, CAR releases revisions and new forms based on things that have happened over the last couple of years to try to make sure that they're covering their bases, make sure that there's no loopholes or issues that are missing from documents so that we can cover ourselves and have easier transactions and less chances for lawsuits and issues like that. So today we're going to talk about the December revisions that are coming. I don't know exactly what date that will be in December. Usually it's third week or so in December. I think like when the new RPA came out, that came out on December 20th. So we could probably look around that same time for those. So there's going to be some new forms that I'm going to show you, and there's going to be some forms that have already existed that they've made some revisions to change some of the paragraphs, and you'll see those revisions on the existing forms. Those revisions will be in red, so be able to see those right away. And on the new forms, they'll be all completely look like the form, and it's a new form. All of these will say draft on them because they're not out yet. And if you have any questions, go ahead and raise your hand or type in the chat, and I'll get to those questions as soon as I can. So without further ado, or unless there's any questions or issues or anything that you guys need, I'm going to go ahead and share my screen so that I can start showing you these revised forms. Okay? All right, perfect. So let me share that. All right, so what you should be seeing right now is the RPA, and I know that we just finished doing the RPA, but there's some changes coming in December. So we're not going to dig super deep, and I just want to show you what those changes are so that you guys are prepped for them and ready when December comes around. So the first one that I want to show you is here. So if you look at paragraph 3E1 in the loan amount, right, where we state the amount of interest and whether it's a fixed or an adjustable rate and what that percentage is not to exceed, they've changed the verbiage to buyer to pay up to blank points to obtain the rate above. And what they're saying is that we're disclosing to you that these points are being paid for only to get the rate that we're declaring as our maximum interest rate. So I think what they're doing is they're addressing the changing in financing that's happening as the market changes to where people are doing the 2-1 buy downs and are affecting the rate based on the points. And I know that technically in most of those that it's the seller that pays it, but remember that is a credit from the seller to the buyer to pay those points. So that's what they're addressing in both here on first and second trust deeds. That's what these are. This is the loan amount for the first, this is the loan amount for any additional finance terms, and that's what that is, that the buyer's paying points to get that rate. Okay. All right. Moving on. So there's a couple changes, and we'll get to them with new forms and changes to the forms. But the buyer representation agreement has changed from the buyer representation agreement to a new form, which is, we'll get to it in just a moment. But when you have a buyer representation agreement, it's called the buyer representation and broker compensation agreement. So now when you have a buyer representation agreement, it says that the buyer is paying you a commission, right? You're being compensated by the buyer. If you have a buyer representation agreement now with your buyer, well, as of December, you've also got to disclose now to the buyer the compensation being paid to you by the seller, by the listing agent. So that's what this new little paragraph is here. It says seller agrees to pay the obligation of buyer to compensate buyer's broker under a separate agreement, CAR form SPBB attached, and I will show you the SPB. It says seller's broker's offer, if any, to compensate buyer broker is unaffected unless otherwise agreed. Okay, so what they're saying here is just if the buyer has an agreement to pay some compensation to the listing agent, to the buyer's agent, we have to we have to disclose. We have to disclose that amount of compensation that we're going to be getting from the seller. But we'll get into that in a moment. I just wanted to show you where that is now. It's actually in the purchase agreement. Okay. And they just added the word delivery here for the 5 days after delivery if the seller's late on delivering documents. Not a big deal. They changed some wording here. Occupied units by tenants or anyone other than the seller. The tenant occupied property addendum is attached. Seller shall disclose to buyer if occupied by tenants or persons other than the seller and attach a TOPA and a counteroffer if not part of the buyer's offer. Okay, that's all. They're just saying that they're going to provide that. For properties with any solar panels or solar powered systems, sellers shall within the time specified in the 7 days they have to disclose anything they know about the solar panels. And there's a new solar disclosure and questionnaire form, and I'll show that to you guys in a moment. So those are the changes coming up to the RPA. Okay, let's move on to the next one. So we talked a little bit about it, the buyer representation and compensation agreement. So this is a new form. It is replacing the buyer representation agreement exclusive, the BRE. So this is it. It has the begin date, the end date, just like it had before. Okay. It has all of the information just like it had prior, what kind of properties they're looking for, what their price points are. It has all of that. Okay. It has now the compensation has moved up, right? The compensation was farther back into the transaction or into the document. So now it's moved forward. So it talks about the compensation that they're getting paid. The broker right to compensation. Broker shall be entitled to compensation specified in paragraph 4A from buyer if during the representation period or any extension thereof, buyer enters into an agreement to purchase, lease, or otherwise acquire any property described in paragraph 3. And the seller thereof completes the transaction as prevented from doing so by default of the buyer as follows, right? So here's the broker's involvement. It's pretty much the same form as the buyer representation agreement was. They've just changed it to state that it's about compensation, not just representation only. There is a new form that goes with it to cancel the buyer representation agreement. So like the listing agreement that we have, there's a cancellation of listing form. There is now a cancellation of buyer representation and compensation form. I'll show that to you guys in a second. And what it does allow you to do is in that cancellation, I can give the buyer a list of properties. So if you see here, it says cancellation of the buyer representation agreement. Either buyer or broker may cancel this agreement by giving written notice to the other. This agreement shall be terminated if paragraph 4B1 applies upon receipt of the notice or blank days after receipt, or if paragraph 4B2 applies, that's this one, the buyer acquisition, 30 days after receipt of the notice, broker shall nonetheless be entitled to compensation if, during the representation period or any time specified in paragraph 4E, buyer acquires property for which there was broker involvement, provided broker delivers to buyer a written list of those properties for which there was broker involvement. The written list broker involvement properties shall be delivered to buyer within 5 calendar days after the effective date of the cancellation. Before, during, and after the 5-day period, buyer is advised to notify any other broker of broker's rights under this paragraph. Okay. If checked, neither party shall have the right to cancel this agreement prior to expiration except by mutual agreement. So what I would suggest is if I'm going to do this buyer representation and compensation agreement, number one, I'm going to check paragraph 4C2, which is this one right here, right? That I'm checking that it can't be canceled by either party unless we both agree to cancel. But what it's telling you is if this is canceled or the time period runs out, any broker involved properties, if I give them a list of those properties within 5 days of the cancellation or the termination of this agreement, if they go to buy one of those properties, I have to step back in as their agent, just like the exclusions work on the listing, right? So exclusions on a listing are that if I give you a list of the buyers who have seen this property while I had it listed in this period of time, 180 days, 90 days, 60 days, whatever you write in the contract, If you go and buy one, if they buy one of these, you buy your home, if one of these buyers comes in and writes an offer and you accept it, I become your listing agent again. Well, it's the same thing on this buyer representation agreement. It says that if you go and write an offer on any of these properties, you have to let your buyer's agent know that I'm your agent for those properties, and I have to step back in and become your buyer's agent. Okay, that's what this is saying in that paragraph now. So it has that same thing, same list. Okay. Authorization to include commission and offer. Buyer authorizes or does not authorize broker to include a term in buyer's offer obligating seller to pay broker directly or through escrow for any compensation that buyer owes broker. Now, you could do that, but what it says in those paperwork. Now, this is separate from what the broker is offering in the MLS. Is it says in that form where you have to disclose that, it says that it's telling the buyer that, hey, it could affect the ability to get your offer accepted. So I would imagine that if you're going to use this form, that you'd be checking this box, does not authorize that, hey, I don't want you asking the seller for the commission that I'm willing to pay you. It goes against the reason why a buyer would be paying you a commission anyway. So that's going to be a discussion that you're going to have with your buyers. My guess is that very few of you guys are going to be using this form going forward. Very few were using it to begin with when it was just the buyer representation agreement. Now even more that you've got to disclose the compensation that you're getting from the other side to your buyer. Probably chances are you guys aren't going to be using this, but I wanted to let you know what the changes were to it and that it existed. Okay. So that's that buyer representation and broker compensation agreement. Okay. I apologize to everybody that is not able to get in, but there's not much I can do at this moment to let anybody in here. And I'm getting a bunch of text messages. Let's see. Let's see if I can. Let's see if I can try this again. Pardon me while I do some work behind the scenes here and try to send this. Let's see if the resending the link will help people out. This is very difficult to do while I'm on the contract class with you guys. Let's try this. Oh, it's not working. Why is it not working? I apologize. Let's see if that works now. No. That's, for some reason, it doesn't want to copy the link anymore. Sorry, guys. Let's try. No, not that. I'll get back to this in a minute.
So they can move and then plug in. It's active, and we'll plug them in as they move in. Like hers is active right there. They just got to change the phone. And she uses Wi-Fi anyway.
Okay, let's try. There's something's going on with my link. I don't know what it is. Okay, sorry guys. I guess they'll have to watch it on YouTube later. I can't figure out what's going on with this. I'm trying to see if I can let people in or if I can share with somebody on here. Copy invite link. Let me try that now. I'm trying to send it out to everybody so they can't get in and see if it'll work now. It's not that. There's something wrong with my link.
Something's wrong with the link, huh?
Yeah.
Okay. Because you have internet and everything, so it's
Okay. All right. Let's get back to class. I tried sending it to people, and the new one I sent you doesn't work either. That's so weird. I don't know. That's the only link I have. I don't know why it wouldn't work. All right. Well, I guess everybody will have to watch it on YouTube except for you lucky 9 that are watching right now. Okay. All right. So let's move on to the next form. Sorry about that, guys. Okay. So this is anticipated broker compensation disclosure. Compensation will be paid pursuant to the multiple listing service. This form is only required to give to the buyer if the buyer has signed a buyer representation agreement with you to pay compensation. This is saying, hey, this is what the MLS is going to pay me in compensation. Okay, that's what it is. And it's a disclosure to the buyer so they know that, hey, I'm getting paid this compensation. And you have to list all the properties that you're going to be showing, or when you make an offer on the properties. This is the date that I'm showing, or the offer's being made, the compensation that's being offered, and where it's coming from, either on the MLS or a CBC I received from the listing agent. So you have to do this. So if the buyer has a compensation agreement with him, you have to disclose that you have this compensation coming from the MLS, from the other broker. Okay, so this is a form that you now have to disclose if you're using that buyer representation agreement and buyer compensation. Let's go to, this is the cancellation of buyer representation. So we talked about that you can cancel it. This is the form you would use for that. When you're going to cancel it, the list of exceptions, all that stuff, that's what you would use this form for, the COBR. Okay? So that's the change. That's used to cancel that original one, that original buyer representation agreement, or buyer representation and buyer compensation agreement. That's that one. They've changed the RLAS. So the residential lease after sale has changed to, you can see where they changed it to housing provider instead of landlord, right? So that I think they're trying to avoid issues with, people having property problems with tenants not moving out, and landlord tenants rights issues, things like that. They've changed it now to that the lease is terminated on a certain amount of calendar days after close of escrow, or on a specific date. They have that there. They changed this, that they added that you can have payments by PayPal or Venmo, will or will not be accepted. They also added the verbiage in here about the maximum allowable security deposits. So just like with any other rental, the maximum security deposit I can charge is equal to 2 months of rent. Unless I'm furnishing the rental, then I can charge 3 times the first month's rent. So it's stating in there that the maximum security deposit that you can collect, even though this is a seller remaining in possession and they're going to move out, they're staying in there after the close of escrow, the maximum security deposit that I can charge is twice the amount of the first month's rent. Okay, so they added that verbiage in for the lease after sale. Now remember, all of these forms are going to come into play in December. I don't know exactly when they're going to hit in December, but they are. And some of these forms are going to be like the RPA. You could probably still get away with using the old RPA, but things like the buyer representation agreement, you won't be able to use those. You'll have to use that buyer representation and brokerage compensation form if you're going to use those forms again. Okay. So residential lease after sale, this one, you'll have to use this new form. You won't be able to use the old one. So what I would suggest is, for those of you guys that are using templates, because I know that there's quite a few out there that use templates, When these updates happen, you have to physically go and update those templates, because if you don't, it's going to try to pull the old form. Now, luckily, in some of these cases, what ZipForms does is when there's a new form that replaces something, they make that old form not available any longer. But the old form that has just been revised is still there. So if there's some changes that happen to contracts, you've got to go in and update all of your templates. You can't just assume that they're updated, okay? And so that's when we get into issues, because we use templates. And that's why I always try to advise you guys not to use templates, because I've seen it many times where, you know, some forms still stay filled in with information that doesn't pertain to the current transaction, because it was a template. Okay, so keep that in mind, that as these things start to update, you've got to update those templates. Okay. All right. So that's the RLAS. Now remember, the RLAS is only required when the seller is remaining in possession for 30 days or more. Okay. If the seller is remaining in possession for 29 days or less, then you're going to use the seller license remaining in possession, or the SIP. Okay. The next one. This is the seller is paying the commission that is. This is separate from stuff that's in the MLS. This is the seller is going to pay the commission, the compensation that the buyer had agreed to in the buyer's representation agreement. So it says here, buyer has entered into written agreement to compensate buyer's broker blank % of the purchase price, or if checked, this amount. As of the date, this seller payment for buyer's broker document is signed by buyer, and pursuant to the MLS, seller's broker has agreed to pay buyer's broker percentage of the purchase price, right? So this is compensation is being paid by the seller side or the buyer's broker, okay? Seller agrees to pay buyer's broker. This is so if it's in the MLS, we're going to leave it by default, or the seller's going to pay this percentage on their own. Buyer authorizes escrow holder upon request to deliver to seller a copy of the portion of the written agreement between buyer and buyer broker, identifying the amount of compensation buyer has agreed to. So now what we're saying here is, look, I have an agreement to pay my buyer's broker this percentage of commission, 2%, 3%, 1%, whatever it is. You are now taking that responsibility on by offering either in the MLS or seller, you're going to pay this percentage on your own to take that on. Again, this form is only required if I have that buyer representation agreement and it's being replaced by the compensation being paid in the MLS or in a separate agreement by the seller. Okay. So again, buyer representation agreement, buyer. So if I'm doing things like I normally do, which most buyer's agents don't have these representation agreements signed. I know some of you do, but most of you don't. If you're just submitting an offer and you're using the compensation in the MLS, you're getting paid by the seller or by the listing broker, then you don't need to use any of these forms, okay? You're fine to keep doing business the way you do. You don't need to check the box in the RPA. You don't need to include this. This is new, and I mean, this probably should have come out, and this is the issue. So this is a non-contingent offer advisory. I'm not going to read you guys the whole thing, but basically what it is just like the buyer's inspection advisory or the seller's advisory that comes with the listing. This non-contingent offer advisory is something that you're going to have to provide to your buyers when they are writing offers that have no contingencies. Now, I know that that is going to be less likely as we've transitioned into this newer market than it was in the previous market, where you guys were writing offers that were no appraisal contingency, no loan contingency, no inspection contingency, right? Because it was a frenzy to try to get my offer accepted. But what this form now does as an advisory to the buyer is it says it lines out for them what it means to remove your contingencies with your offer, so that they're making an educated choice. Now, I'm sure that all of you that are watching this video later or on this class right now are, excuse me, are 100% making it clear to your clients that if you're writing an offer without contingencies, that what the dangers are for them, what that means to them. I'm sure you are. But now what CAR is saying is, well, we want them to sign something that they're acknowledging that they understand the consequences of a non-contingent offer. Okay, so that's what they're asking for. Now, again, this is a form that we probably needed 8 months ago, a year ago. This is not probably going to be super necessary going forward, because I would guess that fewer of you guys are writing offers without contingencies. I was shocked. I talked to an agent earlier this week that had told me they wrote an offer with no loan and no appraisal contingency. And I thought, well, I don't know why you're doing that now, but you did that. So again, if you're writing a non-contingent offer, it breaks down what these contingencies mean to them. And it does say that the broker recommends that you do not write a non-contingent offer. But right here it says it is your decision alone and cannot be made by your broker or real estate agent. So it's given a little bit like a little disclaimer, like, hey, I've told you not to do it. You've chosen to do it. It's your choice. You're on your own. I can't make this decision for you. Okay, so this has to be done if there is a non-contingent offer being written. And I would, if you have a buyer that says, hey, look, I don't want an appraisal contingency, I don't want a loan contingency, I'm going to buy this. If you have a buyer that says that, I would have them sign this non-contingent offer advisory also, not just if it's all contingencies. Okay, so they need to understand what that means to not have those contingencies. Do you guys have any questions so far? I mean, a couple more people were able to join. I don't know what happened to the link for the Zoom, so I apologize. But a couple more people were able to jump on. Anybody have any questions so far? Because I have all those forms still open, so I can even go back to other forms. Go ahead and ask away if you have questions. No? You guys are clear? I
We
feel all... Yeah, go ahead.
Sorry, Kyle. We can
That's
watch
okay,
this
Lily.
after, right? Or start
Yeah,
from
yeah.
where we missed. Okay.
Yeah. No, I'm gonna put it back. I'm gonna put it on YouTube, even though I got a little discombobulated in the middle because I couldn't figure out why the Zoom link was broken. But yeah, it will be up. You guys will be able to see it.
Thank you.
But any questions about any of the forms that we've talked about so far that you guys have seen, right? That you were able to see. Again, they're going to come in December, and I don't know exactly when in December they're going to show up. So just be prepared for any updates. That I would guess that probably sometime between the 15th and the 20th, probably right before Christmas time, those changes will hit. Okay. Now, this is a new disclosure that is going to be required for any listing that has solar panels. And that form is called the Solar Advisory and Questionnaire, or form initials is SOLAR, SOLAR, Solar Advisory and Questionnaire. It is very similar to an SPQ in that it has questions that need to be answered. Just a couple, but here it is. This is a brand new form. So any listing that is being sold with solar panels, this document has to be provided from the seller to the buyer. Solar ownership. Solar systems may be owned outright, owned with financing, owned with a lien or security interest on the real property, or leased. Many property owners who believe that they own their solar system may not have free and clear ownership of that system. Ownership could be subject to a note and deed of trust issued by a solar system was financed when a solar system was financed for a UCC1 financing statement filled with the California Secretary of State. Financing of the solar system may also be secured by an assessment against the real property that is collected through additional property tax payments for the period of the financing. That's a HERO or a PACE, right? Because a seller's property tax statement will reference the solar lien, sellers may not remember the lien or consider it as a separate lien. Nonetheless, it should be disclosed. Some owners obtain private lending to purchase a solar system that is not secured by real property or panels or other equipment attached to it. If the seller is intending for these private loans to be paid off as part of the sale, terms may need to be added to the agreement to address this situation. It's going to have some details about the leases, right? How the liens and leases work. Advertising. All parties are advised that the multiple listing service and other advertisements that are used to list and market property for sale are not contractual agreements. Thus, it is imperative that the buyers of the property with the solar system receive and carefully review copies of all documents, including any solar agreement, underlying security agreements for owned equipment, or any other material that the seller possesses prior to the buyer making any final decision regarding the solar system. Buyers should not simply rely on the information in the MLS or any other advertising material. So what it's saying basically is, because in the MLS somebody will put on there, buyer to assume the lease. Okay, that's very general. But we don't know the process of the assumption, and we also don't know what it's going to do. That if there's a buyer qualified, does it affect their qualifications for the loan to purchase the home? All of those things. That's why there is a period of time for the buyer to be able to have a contingency to investigate their ability to assume the financing or assume the lien, or whatever the lease is, to be able to assume the service contract that goes, even if the property. See, sometimes, and I just found out about this. We had an agent called me, and the seller, instead of transferring the lease, which was the original agreement, was that they were going to transfer this lease over, or the lien, whatever it was, the payments, to the buyer. Instead, because it was almost paid off, the seller says, you know what, I'm just going to pay it off. Somehow, when they paid it off, and I don't know all the details, that meant they terminated the service contract by paying it off with the solar company. And now the solar company doesn't want to service those, so the buyer has solar panels that aren't serviced by anybody, and they need to go find a new service contract with another solar provider. And I don't know how the solar works. I don't know how that process goes. But if that had been something that was discussed previously with the buyer, that was saying, hey, listen, we know we're going to pay it off, and then they were given all the documents, right? So remember, buyer's agent, when you get all the documents for the solar company, whether they're paid off, they're leased, there's a lien, there's some kind of financing to own them, it's your job to help your buyer investigate what the process is, which means calling the solar company. Hey, solar company, the seller's paying off the solar system. What happens after the contract is paid off? Like, that's part of the investigation. Unfortunately, they didn't have the ability to do that investigation because they didn't know until towards the end of the transaction that the seller was paying it off. They thought they were accepting the lease and the contract the way it existed for the seller at the time. So make sure that the communication is there with the seller. Now, the nice thing about this questionnaire is it's going to be part of that. It's going to stimulate the seller and the listing agent now to give you the information, because it's something that's required for them to provide to you. Okay. So that's right here. The Sierra purchase agreement includes a contingency for the review. So it's talking about that, looking for transfer issues, those things. That's what it's talking about. Solar evaluation recommendation, legal advice. Real estate brokers and their agents are not qualified to evaluate the terms, conditions, and or security interests in a solar system. They are also not qualified to determine the quality of solar equipment or the impact of any regulatory scheme on the ownership or use of solar equipment. Buyers and sellers of solar property should consider retaining the service of a solar photovoltaic system inspector if one is available in the area where the property is located. I don't even know what that is. Brokers recommend that the sellers and buyers of solar property exercise diligence in obtaining copies of any contracts, agreements, or other documents related to any possible solar system security interests as soon as practicable to enable a prompt evaluation of what may be required to facilitate a sale of the property. I'm not going to read the rest of it, but it's just basically saying what we talked about a moment ago, which is you're going to share this information with them, and in that investigation period that the buyer has, which is part of the contract, the contingency to investigate the process with the solars, you've got to do all of this stuff. You've got to contact the solar company. You've got to review the contracts. You've got to see what the effect is on the buyer. If you can get somebody that can if there's an inspector specific to solar panels that's available to you, you have the right to have that inspector go and check the solar panels and make sure that they are working properly and that they are connected. Because we've had lots of issues where people are not getting the benefit from the solar panels that they thought they would get, right? It's happened in the past. And there's so many of these little solar companies out there that are selling people on solar, and, maybe it's not the right process. And sometimes the sellers don't know everything that goes into it. So you've got to do as much investigation as possible. during that investigation period. Okay, so here's the questionnaire. Just like the SPQ, just like the TDS, the question is, are you the seller aware of? Right? That's it. Are you the seller aware of? If you're not aware of it, then guess what the answer is? No. If you are aware of it, then the answer is yes, and you got to explain what that yes is. The approximate age of the solar system. Are you aware of the approximate? Yes, I am aware of the approximate age, so I'm going to put it in. Are you aware of the name of the installation company? Yes, I am, so I'm going to give you the name. Does the solar system provide power only for a portion of the property? That I don't know. Yes or no? No, it does the whole property. Yes, it's only for this part. Approximate size of the system. If you know, you know. If you don't know, you don't know. Whether the system is on-grid only and off-grid or off-grid only. Do you know the answer to those questions? What's going to happen now is this is going to prompt conversations. I think it's going to be good because it's going to clarify a lot of things. Whether there is a battery bank or power wall that enables the system to run off-grid. Whether any portion of the system is installed anywhere other than the roof. And then whatever's a yes, you're going to explain. Okay? The next one is for owned solar systems. This is if applicable and conveying with the property, right? So I've already paid it off. Whether the system still has a balance or any financing. Does it have a balance? Yes or no? If yes, what's the balance, right? How much? If yes, is it secured by an interest on title? Yes or no, right? They're talking about if there's a balance. If yes, is the loan transferable or assumable to the buyer? Yes or no? Are you aware? I don't know. Yes or no? Okay. Note, if it is not secured on title, the agreement may have to be amended for buyers to be responsible for the balance. Could be, right? If they've made some kind of financing agreement with the solar company that has nothing to do with a lien on the property, where it's not attached to the property, it's not tied to the property, then there is a chance that the financing can't be transferred. That has happened also in the past. We've had transactions where they assumed they were going to transfer the financing, and then they find out that the solar company will not transfer that financing to the buyer, and it has to be paid off. Okay? Whether there is an annual true-up bill from the power company. Do they know that? I don't know what that is because I don't have solar. Whether there is any other type of lien or encumbrance on title on a property tax bill or otherwise. Whether there is a power purchase agreement. If yes, you have to complete 6C below. Okay? Leased solar system or systems with power purchase agreements if applicable. The name of the company with the lease or purchase power agreement. If yes, what is the name? The year the agreement expires. If yes, the year. The current monthly solar payments. If yes, what is the amount? Whether the payments are fixed or vary over the life of the agreement. Whether the lease or power purchase agreement is transferable to assumable by buyer. Whether the solar system is not owned at the end of the agreement. If not owned, can the equipment be purchased? If yes, what is the estimated amount that would still be owed? So now we've answered some questions. I think, again, like I said, going through and making this a questionnaire, making this a disclosure is going to clarify some issues that we've had with buyers in the past. Because now, based off of this, one or two things is going to happen. Either the seller on their own is going to start doing some investigation on what is happening with their contracts, if they have them, or because they make these disclosures and don't know the answers, the buyer is going to start making some requests. And then they're going to have to get documents from the seller and as much information from them as they can to start doing our own investigation as buyer to make sure that we have the ability to assume these, the seller has to pay them off. Now, my suggestion is, knowing that I have to do all these disclosures and know these answers, if I'm going to take a listing today with someone who's got solar panels, these are going to be some of the questions I'm going to ask on the listing appointment. Right? I might go through this after they sign the listing, like right away, so that I can say to them, okay, well, great, you don't know the answers to these questions. We got to find them out before we start marketing the property, because this now becomes a contingency. It's something that we have to disclose to the buyer. And because we have to disclose it to the buyer, if we don't find out until we get into escrow, it could cause our escrows to fall out, delay the escrows, right, or cause other issues. Now, if we know what it is ahead of time, if it's something that we have to pay off, then we know what that liability is that's going to come out of our proceeds. If there's a lot of steps on something that needs to be transferred, we know what those steps are so that we can inform the buyers, and we can do that at the very beginning, right? We could do that from the beginning, so we're not doing it halfway through our escrow, which is ultimately a lot of times what happens. right? Because the seller and the listing agents don't know the answers to the questions. So this is, I think, come December, this is going to be this is good for the transactions that have solar panels, to have to dig in and have the seller have to answer questions. Okay. So questions about this solar form? Anybody have questions? No? Okay. They made a couple little changes to the seller's counteroffer and the seller's multiple counter. So I'm just going to show you the multiple. And what they changed here is just to add this, they added some verbiage. First, unless otherwise agreed to or altered in another counteroffer, the down payment and loan amounts will be adjusted in the same proportion as the original offer. So that's if we're changing prices, right? But the dollar amount of any initial and increased deposit and seller's credit shall remain unchanged from the original offer. So what they added there was just to say, listen, let's say that our original offer or your counteroffer price is $700,000, right? And my original offer, so your counteroffer, you're countering me to pay $700,000. My original offer was at $695,000, okay? So my initial deposit was $10,000. My initial deposit, even though it shows it's a percentage there in the purchase agreement, is not affected by the new change in price, which means that if I don't have to increase my deposit stays the same, right? And the credits stay the same. They're not affected by any changes in price, okay? Unless, and then the other new form here, unless otherwise agreed or altered another counter, if in the original offer, the appraisal contingency amount is lower than the original offer price, then the dollar amount of any difference, appraisal gap, shall be deducted from the final contract price to create the final appraisal contingency amount. So now by default, it's saying to the seller, you are paying the difference between the appraised value and the offer price. You're going to agree to reduce the price to that appraised value, right? That's the appraisal gap. It's saying that, okay? So if, just my suggestion, if I'm listing agent, I mean, would be my thing. If I'm the listing agent and I'm countering things over my original ask price, right? I know that, hey, this is going to be a stretch to appraise. I'm probably going to leave it alone. But if I'm getting offers, and this is probably happening a lot less than it was happening, again, 8 months ago. If I'm getting offers that are considerably above my asking price because they're trying to get their offer accepted, then I'm going to make sure that my counter changes those terms to the buyer is going to be responsible for any appraisal gap. Remember, we talked about this in the past. But so just so you guys are aware that the counter offer now, the seller's multiple counter, the seller's counter offer now states the seller is agreeing to reduce the price from the offer price to the appraised value if there is a difference. Okay? You guys have to be aware of that. So that's the biggest change on counter offers. So you have to be aware of that. That's coming in December. It's not there now. It's coming in December, but you've got to be prepared for it, which means you've got to pay attention. And I know what happens to us a lot of times is we get into that mode of transaction where it's like, I got offers, right? And especially like, hey, I know it's taking a little longer for listings to sell today. But remember, this is just a normal market. And when we're in a normal market or a seller's market, whatever you want to call it, our inventory is low. The days on market are less than 90 days right now, right? We're in a normal seller's market. It's still a seller's market, not a buyer's market yet. Even though inventory is a little bit lower, inventory is increasing, right? The house days on market is increasing. All of those things are changing. It's still not a buyer's market yet. But I've got to be prepared that when I'm dealing with my sellers that I know this stuff, because there's still going to be times where people are listing properties a little bit higher than they're supposed to. People are writing offers a little bit higher than they're supposed to because properties that are priced right are still getting a lot of activity. They're still getting multiple offers. It might not be 20 offers, maybe it's 4 or 5, but those well-priced, good neighborhood homes are still getting a lot of activity. And so you still may have to deal with these appraisal issues. Keep in mind, because prices are so weird right now, right? We don't know, like if we look at comps from 3 months ago, that comp from 3 months ago might not be a good marketable price, even though it's a good appraisal price. So keep that in mind, right? That this is in here now. So that's the counter offer. Questions on the counter offer. Again, December. This is coming December. This is not going to be on your counter offers that you're going to do today, tomorrow, or the next day. This notice of broker involved properties, this goes back to that buyer representation and compensation agreement that we were talking about earlier. This is the form that you're going to give them with the list of the properties that you had involvement in, right? This is the form. So remember, it said if I cancel this agreement or it expires within 5 days of that cancellation or expiration, I have to give them a list of the broker involved properties. This is the form for that. Okay, so this is the form I will use to say, hey, you know, Sylvia, I know we're canceling, you're not going to work with me anymore, but here's all the properties that I showed you that I was involved with, right? That we had communications with the listing agent, that I introduced you to, that I took you to. Now, this is not stuff I emailed you. This is not stuff that you went to an open house and called me and said, hey, I just went to an open house and saw it. Now, if I wrote an offer on it, that's different. But if I showed it to you, if I introduced the property to you, I was involved in it, okay, then I can give you this list of those properties. And if you were to go buy one of them in the time that was specified in our agreement, I would step back in as your buyer representation, okay? So that's what that form is for. And the last, we got two more. Okay, so the extension of time addendum that you guys have been using for a very long time to do extensions is changing to the extension of time amendment. So they changed it from an addendum to an amendment. And the reason they did that is that they added an offer expiration to the ETA, which means now if I send, right, I'm the buyer's agent and I'm asking for an extension of my close of escrow, extension of a contingency period, any other terms that I'm extending, whatever it might be. I am the one who is proposing it, right? So I'm the buyer. I need more time. Then what I'm going to do is I'm going to check this box as buyer, because buyer is proposing this extension of time amendment, which may be withdrawn by me at any point prior to you accepting it, or it'll be deemed revoked if it gets past the third day at 5 p.m. Right? If you're not signed, if it doesn't sign, so if I get it as buyer and I say to Javier, the listing agent, here is my extension of time amendment requesting an extension on my escrow period, on my inspection period, on my loan contingency, on my appraisal contingency, whatever it is, here it is. I'm sending it to you. I am the proposing party, right? So I check the buyer box. If Javier gets it as listing agent, takes it to a seller, and a seller goes, no, I don't want to do it. If 3 days passes without them signing it, it is now not valid any longer. That request for an extension, I'd have to do a new one to request it, okay? The buyer and the seller, right? If I'm proposing it, I'm going to check the box. So then I'm going to sign it as buyer. If I accept it, as long as I accept it in this period of time, I would accept it here as seller. And then vice versa. If seller's asking for an extension, you get here, seller signs it first, buyer would sign it based on this time. So they made that change to the extension of time addendum, so it's not just floating out there forever, which, if you remember, we talked about addendums and the danger of addendum, right? The danger of them is they don't expire. So if I'm doing negotiations on addendums, right? So I have addendum number 1 asking for a credit, and then the seller doesn't want to pay that credit, so seller gives addendum number 2 saying, right? So I have an addendum number 1 signed by the buyer that says, hey, I want a $5,000 credit. Then I have an addendum number 2 from the seller that says, I'll give you a $3,000 credit. And then I have an addendum number 3 from the buyer stating, no, okay, can I have a $4,000 credit? And then the third one, the fifth or the fourth addendum comes from the seller and says, no credit at all. I have addendum number 2, which is already signed by the seller, that says they'll give me a $3,000 credit. And now addendum number 4 says they'll give me 0 credit. If I, buyer, go back and sign addendum number 2, with a $3,000 credit and send that to escrow, that's a fully executed addendum. None of the other ones are, which means escrow is going to take that as, yeah, they're paying a $3,000 credit. That's why I've told you guys in the past, addendums are for space, amendments are for negotiation. And it's the same thing here with an extension of time addendum. Let's say that before, when they didn't have an expiration date on it, if I sent you a request for an extension and I signed it, right? And then you said, no, I'm not going to do it. And then I sent you another extension of time and you said, nah, I'm not going to do that one either, right? So now I've got two. And then you send your own extension saying, this is how much time I will give you, right? You say, I'll give you, instead of 2 weeks, I'll give you 10 days. Okay, well, I need 12 days. So I send you another one that says 12 days, and you say no to that one. No, I'm not signing 12 days. You know what? As a matter of fact, there is no extension, right? We're not going to grant you extension. Forget it. It's done. We're going to send you demand to close. And then I go back to that addendum, that extension of time that you signed giving me 10 days, and I sign it. That's a valid extension. So they've taken away that fear that an old floating around never expiring document could get fully executed and become part of the agreement. And then where's the argument that it isn't part of it because it's fully executed? So they've done away with that by giving this expiration date on the ETA, which I think is a good idea. I think it's a great idea. Okay. Any questions about the extension of time amendment now? It's not the extension of time addendum. It will become December, the extension of time amendment. So any questions? No? All right. And the final one is just they made little changes to the cancellation of contract. So here's the cancellation of contract. They added this section here. Cancellation under paragraph 1A requires the signature of either buyer or seller, but not both. Paragraphs 1B and 2 require the signatures of both parties to be effective. So what they're saying is this paragraph up here of who's canceling, it just needs the signature of the person canceling, right? So if it's the seller canceling, the seller's got to sign it. If it's the buyer canceling, the buyer's got to sign it, right? So you see here, buyer or seller signatures, party canceling the contract. This second one, they're telling you, hey, listen, here, both of you guys have to sign to agree to the terms of paragraph 2, which is the disposition of the deposit and canceling the escrow. This is canceling the transaction, the actual CAR contract that we have. That's what this cancels. This cancels the escrow. Okay, so they're two separate things. So I could technically tell you, hey, I'm canceling a contract, which I have done and I can do if the terms are okay. The cancellation of escrow is a whole other process, and that's what that second one is. What they did add up here for paragraph 1 is this proposed mutual cancellation may be withdrawn by the party initiating it at any time prior to the agreement by the other party in paragraph 2 below, and shall be deemed revoked unless by 5 p.m. on the third day after it is signed by initiating party in paragraph 1, or by a date and time, it is signed by the other party in paragraph 2, and a copy of this completed form is delivered to the initiating party. So now it has an expiration date also. So if I send a cancellation in, and the seller doesn't sign the cancellation, 3 days from the time I send it, it doesn't exist anymore. We have to do a new one when we come to an agreement. So again, it doesn't have cancellations that are just floating out there for people to, take advantage of. It expires, okay? They didn't change anything to this section down here, but I like that this cancellation now has an expiration date. That if I don't get a response down here in a certain amount of time, it expires, okay? There's a couple other new forms, but they're more about property management. So I didn't really go into those since we don't do property management. But any questions now that we finished? Again, I apologize for those of you guys that were able to, because I see like maybe five people were able to jump on late. If you didn't get on at the beginning, I will have it on YouTube later today. And I'm going to try to edit that so that it doesn't look so crazy while it's on YouTube. Any questions from you guys right now? No? None? Okay. Again, I thank you guys for being here. I apologize for the issues. Hopefully those of you that missed out will be able to watch on YouTube. So those of you that were able to get on, please let everybody else know that it's on YouTube, and then I'll try to also share that with everyone also. All right, guys. Thank you guys for being here. I appreciate it. Don't forget that we were, probably about a month away from those forms being active. So don't forget to do your updates when you have the chance to do the updates. So thank you guys for being here. I appreciate it. Have a great day.